Most Western multinationals continue to exploit poor African countries by paying less tax while making abnormal profits. They often transfer the proceeds to their country of origin. Now, this has led to a massive increase in illicit financial flows, and Africa is losing billions of dollars. Let's listen here to Amina Mohammed, the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, on how Africa is losing a colossal amount of money through these illicit financial flows.
At a time when Africa is trying to maximize domestic resource mobilization, it's losing $50 billion a year to illicit flows. And that probably is not an estimate that is anywhere near the reality.
Hello, I'm Mubarak Kenya, and welcome to this week's edition of Africa Today. In our program today, we are focusing on how Africa loses billions of dollars yearly as a result of illicit financial flows. In the second segment of our program, we shall delve into an environmental issue: the dumping of electronic waste in Africa by Western multinationals.
See the computers, all computers from Europe. You see it, plenty of computers like this. Like this one from France. You see it, made in France.
We have a lot in store for you till the end of our show today, so stay tuned, and thanks for making Press TV your channel of choice.
Who's stealing Africa's cash? The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, recently released its flagship Economic Development in Africa Report 2020, titled Tackling Financial Flows for Substantial Development in Africa. The report shows that every year an estimated $88.6 billion, which is equivalent to 3.7% of Africa's GDP, leaves the continent in the form of illicit financial flows. Illicit financial flows are movements of money and assets across borders which are illegal in source, transfer, or use. The source of this cash is mainly corruption, criminal activities, tax evasion, and transfer mispricing.
The report by United Nations Conference on Trade and Development includes alarming information on how Africa loses billions of dollars yearly as a result of these illicit financial flows. It also highlights the impact of such losses on the development of the continent. UNCTAD Secretary General Mokisa Kitui says illicit financial flows rob Africa and its people of their prospects.
Countries with the high illicit financial flows are demonstrably less productive in agriculture than those with more control on illicit financial flows. Countries with high illicit financial flows invest about 25% less in health, 58% less in education than comparable countries on the continent.
The UNCTAD report has mentioned some examples of illicit financial flows. For instance, Angola lost $60 billion through capital flight between 1986 and 2015. In Nigeria, oil export misinvoicing cost the country $44 billion, and import misinvoicing led to a loss of $45 billion between 1996 and 2014. Zambia's net export misinvoicing of copper led to losses amounting to $14.5 billion from 1995 to 2014.
Addressing a high-level virtual meeting last December, the UN Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed said, at a time when Africa is mobilizing resources for pandemic recovery and sustainable development, illicit financial flows are robbing the continent billions of dollars. Let's take a listen.
At a time when Africa is trying to maximize domestic resource mobilization, it's losing $50 billion a year to illicit flows. And that probably is not an estimate that is anywhere near the reality. These staggering losses would be enough to fill 75% of the continent's health financing gap. They would more than be what is needed to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal on inclusive education, SDG 4, and they are 1/3 of what Africa needs annually to fund infrastructure projects.
Now, for more on this, we contacted Peter Fabricius, who is a consultant with the Institute for Security Studies. We also have Dr. Carlotta Schuster, an economist with the Division for Africa and Least Developed Countries at the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. She's also one of the authors of the UNCTAD report on tackling financial flows for sustainable development in Africa. Thanks a lot for your time. Let's start off with Dr. Schuster. Now, can you briefly elaborate on the report you co-authored?
First of all, let me thank you for giving the opportunity to speak about UNCTAD's research on illicit financial flows. In the report, we define illicit financial flows as cross-border flows of money or goods that are illicit in origin, transfer, and use. Since extractive commodities matter for the continent, as they constitute more than 60% of total African exports and 30% of GDP, getting returns right is crucial for fostering sustainable development. The report estimates that the continent has lost at least 220 billion linked to the export of extractive commodities since 2010, and that high-value, low-weight commodities like gold, diamonds, and platinum are the main drivers.
Thanks for that introduction, Dr. Schuster. Now, how have these illicit financial flows impacted on ability by countries to combat poverty and develop?
IFF's illicit financial flows are a global problem, but socioeconomic costs are especially high in Africa. Countries with high illicit financial flows spend on average 58% less on education and 25% less on health. In some countries, illicit financial flows linked to the extraction of natural resources have an unquantifiable multiplier effect, where they undermine peace and security and finance conflicts, which is extremely costly in terms of people's prosperity, poverty reduction, and sustainable development.
Thanks for that, Dr. Schuster from the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development.
According to iWatch Africa website, multinational tech companies such as Google and Facebook operating legally across Africa pay substantially lower taxes as a result of obsolete tax rules. Why are African countries not doing enough to stop or reduce illicit financial flows which take place by exploiting local legal loopholes?
It's difficult because a lot of these tax practices are not illegal. And I mean, you know, the OECD and the G20 and so on have been working quite hard to make them illegal, or at least to discourage governments from doing that. And they're having some success, but clearly not enough, because I think a lot of foreign jurisdictions derive too much profit from them. A lot of little, you know, tax haven countries, territories of Britain or US or whatever, sort of depend quite heavily on them. And then, of course, there's just corruption. You know, I mean, there's guilt on both sides.
As you mentioned there, cash stolen from Africa mostly ends up in Western financial institutions. Now, why is enough action not being taken by the United States and major European governments to stop their territories from being a destination of these illicit financial flows?
But they're clearly not enough. You know, the Panama Papers and so on have shown that there's still a huge amount of money that is moving clandestinely, at the very least, if not blatantly illegally, from all over the world. But let's say we're talking about Africa, from Africa and other developing parts of the world to I guess largely to banks in the developed world. And so it's clearly something that's difficult to combat because it's profitable to a lot of banks and a lot of jurisdictions. And so, you know, sustained effort is needed to combat it.
As we saw earlier in the program, Nigeria is among the African countries mostly affected by illicit financial flows. The country is currently ranked 146th out of 180 countries in the 2019 Corruption Perceptions Index. War on corruption has not achieved a significant milestone in the overall prevention of corruption in the country. The country's Vice President, Oluyemi Osinbajo, last year warned that the illicit financial flows out of Africa also undermine the foundations of democracy.
They undermine the foundations of democracy and provide the financial incentives for terrorist activities and fuel conflicts on the continent.
Mr. Fabricius, you earlier mentioned that illicit financial flows are a two-way traffic and that some African officials are involved. Now, can you elaborate?
You looked at some of the reports that have been done by other institutions like the late Kofi Annan's institution a few years ago, where what was happening in a country like the DRC, and I don't know if it still is, the Democratic Republic of Congo, where what was happening is that the state-owned enterprises, often mining enterprises, were selling off their minerals at ridiculously low prices to private entrepreneurs, who were then selling them on to at the real market value. And clearly what was happening there was that those private business people, foreign business people, mostly, I guess, were giving huge kickbacks to get people in government, including probably right up to the top,
What needs to be done to end these illicit financial flows?
This is a very good question. The Economic Development in Africa report proposes a 10-point plan to tackle illicit financial flows. At the national level, better customs enforcement, better geological information, and increased transparency around resource contracts will allow to increase revenues. At the regional level, information sharing between countries and unifying markets through the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is another avenue that allows countries to exert their power in international commodity markets. At the international level, better cooperation on international taxation and reducing harmful tax competition between countries allows to curb illicit financial flows further. Illicit financial flows are a shared problem between developed and developing countries, and curbing them requires global solutions.
Mr. Fabricius, you have the last word. Western countries clearly need to take measures to stop their jurisdictions from being used as a haven for looted African cash. On the other side of the coin, what should African governments do to tackle this problem of illicit financial flows?
Is that African countries have to improve their ability to conduct revenue collection at home. Very few African countries actually have efficient and capable tax administrations. In a way, this continent has become so addicted, if you like, or habituated to foreign aid that it just hasn't had the motivation in many cases.
Tackling corruption and functional revenue collection are key factors in tackling illicit financial flows in Africa.
West dumps e-waste in Africa.
E-waste is used electronic items that are nearing the end of their useful life and are discarded or given to be recycled. The rapid modernization, industrialization, and consumer appetite for better products has exacerbated e-waste management challenges. Several African countries have become the world's largest dumping grounds for electronic waste from Western countries. This e-waste dumping has created a deadly industry that has put thousands at risk.
If I see different way, this one is we are suffering for a year because the heat is there, where the smoke to the disturb us. So if you see good work, we will go join it and leave this one.
E-waste dumping is actually a continuation of waste colonialism, where high GDP Western countries in Europe and North America were accessing African land for inexpensive disposal of waste. They were using Africa and primarily countries in the Gulf of Guinea, especially Nigeria, Ghana, and Ivory Coast, as a dump for their toxic waste.
For an incisive analysis on this, we have contacted Nimo Bassey, an environmental activist, author, and director of Health of Mother Earth Foundation. Thanks a lot for joining us today. Our first question. Now, despite all the hype about protecting the environment, it appears Western countries do not really care for others, as they are now dumping electronic waste in Africa. What's your take?
Unfortunately, when it comes to environmental health and dumping of waste around the world, Africa is seen basically as a dumping site. So Africa usually is seen as a storehouse for exploitation, but it's also seen as a place to dump waste. And the act of dumping toxic waste in Africa, e-waste in Africa, is not accidental. It's actually economically propelled. It's also a deliberate political action. In 1991, a chief economist in the World Bank said that it made economic sense to dump toxic waste in Africa because Africa is vastly under-polluted. When we have that line of thinking at that level of global governance, then we can see that what is happening across the continent is a very deliberate act, and it needs a deliberate pushback.
Thanks for that, Nimo Bassey, environmental activist from Nigeria, and stay tuned for more.
From the start of this country, we haven't had really any answer for the electronic waste that we produce. Talk less of the electronic waste that gets dumped on us from outside.
Why have most governments in the Gulf of Guinea region failed to stop their territories from being used as dumping ground for hazardous waste?
The sad situation is that some of our regulators are not really focused on what they ought to be doing, and they get carried away by other things, and they're not paying attention to ensuring that the environment is not damaged this way. We have regulators who believe that accepting some of these waste is kind of economically viable. It brings some resources into the country. They're looking for how to generate revenue, and they keep a blind eye to the dumping of these dangerous e-waste on the continent, especially Nigeria and Ghana, as you mentioned.
Speaking at the launch of our National Integrated E-Waste Management Program in 2018, President Nana Akufo-Addo of Ghana noted that the downside of the ICT revolution has meant the production of high volumes of electronic and electrical wastes.
E-waste is a major global problem and one of the top environmental challenges of this, our 21st century. Indeed, many of the ICT equipment imported into the country, as we say in Ghana, are second-hand. Most of these products are imported illegally in contravention of regional and international laws, such as the Bamako Convention, the Basel Convention, and EU waste shipment regulations. It is in line with this responsibility that the Hazardous and Electronic Waste Control and Management Act, Act 917 of 2016, has been passed. Today's launch, ladies and gentlemen, marks the initiation of two key provisions of Act 917, which are critical to the successful implementation of this new law.
According to the UN Environment Agency, Nigeria now ranks alongside Ghana as one of the world's leading destinations for electronic waste. The country receives 71,000 tons of used consumer goods through the two main ports in Lagos from the European Union and other more industrialized economies every year. Nigeria is an attractive destination for waste exporters, partly due to the limited enforcement of import restrictions and other regulations. Do we have adequate international regulations to stop e-waste dumping in Africa?
Again, as is usual with many environmental issues, sometimes it's not really the lack of regulation that makes it impossible to take care of the environment. It's actually a lack of willingness to protect the environment and protect the people. We have in Africa, for example, the Bamako Treaty, which ought to be endorsed by every country. I'm not quite certain if Nigeria has endorsed as at this time. As at last year, as at late 2019, they hadn't endorsed it. This is a treaty that would have protected the country from dumping of toxic waste. But
Ghana is said to have the largest informal recycling industry in Africa and imports some 40,000 tons of e-waste annually. There are several homegrown initiatives in the country to deal with the e-waste problem. A social entrepreneur and artist, together with his friends, have been turning e-waste from the sprawling dumping ground in Ghana's capital, Accra, into high-end furniture made by the people working in the dump.
It's true that Abablushi is the result of negative externalities from, dumping by more developed European countries, but I chose to see the opportunity within the mess. I chose to see the opportunity to create and turn what has been called a dump into an opportunity.
Still in Ghana, an NGO known as the Green Advocacy is working to improve the situation for workers at the e-waste site with machinery that strips the wires of their casing.
So since 2009, we had this idea of setting up some kind of pilot recycling center to help the people here stop burning. So a customer comes in with a piece of cable, we just take it through this end, it goes the other way, we get the plastic, they take their metal. So it's like really fast, no issues, you just walk in, you pay your 50 pesos, that's it.
While such initiatives are an artistic way of solving this e-waste problem, they quite clearly cannot provide a lasting and substantial solution to the challenge posed by this hazardous waste. What immediate action needs to be taken to save Africa from further dumping of hazardous waste by former colonial powers?
I believe the first step is actually to decolonize the continent. We're still running a neo-colonial system that listens too much to the former colonial masters. And this overbearing influence of the colonial powers, the imperialist powers on the African political system. And then, of course, we need to fight against poverty.
Mr. Basse there believes that Africa needs to eradicate neo-colonialism to stop the destruction of the continent's environment and preserve it for future generations. What do you think? Do let us know your views through our social media handles. That's all we had for you in today's edition. On behalf of the entire Africa Today team, thank you for being with us. Take care and God bless you.